You've worked long and hard on a task force report, plus you've got a lot of experience. So if you need more time than that, why don't you take it?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Feinstein, Senator Udall. I'm very pleased to be here. I was chair of the Secretary of Energy task force report.
Could you speak directly into the mic, John?
Yes. Is that better?
Better.
If it's not, poke me again and I'll do better. So I'm here to report to you on this task force that I chaired, and I want to make clear what our task was. The Secretary asked the task force to describe an initiative that had the potential of giving the country the option, the ability to have between 5,000 and 10,000 gigawatts of electricity built annually in the time period 2030 to 2050. That was our task. Many other questions about nuclear power were not part of our task. So what would the country have to do to restore the level that, for example, was here when I joined the Department of Energy in 1976. That was the task. The summary report, summary charts are in the public domain. They've been supplied to committee staff. So I'm just going to focus on the main views of the committee, what were the message we want of our task force, what the message is, and then say a few words about 5 or 6 main findings. So here are the main takeaways. If the country is going to have a nuclear option in 2030, it must undertake an initiative of the scope and size that this committee described. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if you do not undertake a major initiative now, it is inevitable that in 2030 the country will not have a nuclear option. Secondly, any such initiative is going to require time, considerable federal resources, redesign of electricity markets, and sustained and skilled management. Third, there's no shortcut to doing this. There's not going to be a magic technology provided that at low cost, quickly, can get you safe and reliable nuclear power. Those are the takeaway messages. So I want to now speak to the 5 or 6 central findings and recommendations of the task force report. First, as you know, the nuclear fleet is aging, and there have been a number of early retirements. The early retirements are due in many respects to the rules governing electricity rates and dispatch that differ in different parts of the country, which makes it challenging to have value-based nuclear power. Examples include the structure of rates in wholesale capacity markets, preferential dispatch rules for renewable generation, exclusion of nuclear power from renewable portfolio standards, and rates that are inadequate to assure recovery investment. The task force report makes several suggestions for redesign of market rate structure, but for existing plants, this has to be done on a state-by-state basis, and different states are approaching it in different ways. New York came to some agreement which seems to be suitable for that state. I believe that Illinois is under detailed discussions at the present time, but fundamentally for existing reactors, that disparity in market structure has to be addressed at a state level, and it's not going to be changed easily. The outlook for the construction of nuclear plants in the United States and other OECD countries is bleak, primarily because of the high overnight capital cost of nuclear power, roughly $5,000, compared to natural gas, $1,000 or less, which makes the levelized cost of nuclear power for the foreseeable future higher than the closest competitor, which is, at least for the time being, with low natural gas prices, the levelized cost of electricity from natural gas. The cost disparity would be greatly diminished if the carbon-free nature of nuclear power were recognized. It could be recognized in 2 ways: by the assessment of a carbon emission charge based on the social cost of carbon on fossil fuel generating electricity plants, or alternatively on a production payment to new nuclear plants, not existing nuclear plants, for their carbon-free, that recognizes their carbon-free character. That is on the order of 2.7 cents per kilowatt hour. That is their carbon-free equivalent value. Let me note that wind and photovoltaics and solar electricity generation have that same carbon-free character, and indeed do have an ongoing, through the production, through the investment tax credit, a contribution from the taxpayers of this country roughly comparable to the 2.7 cents I mentioned before. So that would be a rule that I would apply to all new carbon-free electricity generation. The task force actually recommends a two-part program. It is not only about advanced nuclear reactors. First point is, are there light water reactor technologies which will lead to new plant constructions of lower cost and which have other advantages, such as the small modular reactor? So the first aspect of the recommendations is pursue promising light water reactor technologies which no longer have an unproven technology, but which have the practical questions of cost, licensing, siting, waste management. So our first, but all new plants need to have a 2.7 cent production payment, or its equivalent, in order to prove itself competitive with natural gas generation, which is the generating, of course, carbon. For advanced reactors, based on new technology, the task force recommends a four-part program to bring an advanced program from the research level to the construction of a first-of-a-kind plant, first-of-a-kind commercial plant. The task force based its estimate of the time and cost of that as being $11.6 billion, with huge uncertainty around that number, and taking about 25 years. An important aspect of that judgment was based on carefully looking at a stage-by-stage development program from concept all the way to construction of a first commercial-scale plant. There are many people who believe that could be shorter. And indeed, as was mentioned, Mr. Chairman, there are 20 or 30 venture capital-based firms which are exploring all different sorts of technologies. They would see optimistically a much smaller time and cost for going through this development process for an advanced reactor. We don't believe that's so, and we believe one important way of deciding is to compare the template for development that the task force has proposed with a template for development that the private sector firms are suggesting. In any event, the point I want to leave with the committee is, in our judgment, roughly speaking, this is a $6.5 billion program for the period from selecting a plant all the way to the point where you start spending money on your first commercial plant. We talked about financing of that. We believe that it should be in a well-run program, roughly half provided by the federal government, mostly in the early stages where there are great technology efforts to reduce technology risks, and the latter half more by private sector investors who see the practicality of these new reactor types. Let me next turn to fuel cycle and waste management. I should say to you that when I was in the Department of Energy in the mid-'70s, the department confirmed President Ford's decision not to do commercial reprocessing of spent fuel. And the department continually proposed no additional funding for Clinch River breeder reactor. But there was a great effort to maintain light water reactor technology and the base nuclear technology for next generation plants. But there's no question about it that advanced reactors will have a different fuel cycle and therefore require different approaches for both licensing and for waste management. That is a part of the challenge of moving to a new generation of reactors. Now, we recommend for the management of this program that we propose, this 25-year, $11.9 billion, $11.6 billion program, the creation of a quasi-public corporation created by the Congress with a one-time appropriation for that long period of a difficult technical task going through several different administrations to pay attention and responsibly execute this program. I notice that the Blue Ribbon Task Force that you mentioned, that you both support, as I understand it, of Lee Hamilton and Brent Scowcroft, recommends exactly the same sort of a creation of a quasi-public corporation to carry out the waste management part of this challenge. There may be a possibility for having a single, as committee staff has suggested to me, quasi-public corporation carry out both the waste management piece and the new reactor development piece. The NRC today only has recent experience with licensing light water reactor plants. That means that if you want to proceed to an advanced reactor, the NRC must develop the capability to do that licensing carefully. It's going to require more time and more resources for the NRC to do that job. We believe, and in our report we discuss, we had 2 ex-chairs of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on a task force, a staged approach to the licensing of advanced reactors that we believe deserves attention. Some developers may choose to construct and license new advanced reactors in other countries, for example, China. I remind those developers and everyone here that the first time one of those plants come back into the United States, they will have to go through the whole entire NRC process again. So we will always have the oversight of the NRC prospect. My final point, Mr. Chairman, has to do with international linkages. For a long, long time, the counterproliferation policy of the United States, where we've been a world leader, has been based on the influence we have through our knowledge and our activities in nuclear power technology. As you know, the plants which are going to be built around the world are not going to be in Europe, they're not going to be in the United States, they're mainly going to be in China, in India, in Russia, in several countries in Asia, which this will be their first plant, the Emirates, Turkey, Jordan. We want to make sure that the proliferation and safety of those, the proliferation resistance of those plants is maintained. We have a national security interest in maintaining our international activities, especially in safety, in the future of nuclear power. I want to make a concluding remark. The task force was completely unanimous in this report. We had a wide range of people with different experience and backgrounds. Unanimous. Especially unanimous on the point that if the United States does not undertake an initiative like this, the nuclear option is not going to be there in 2030. Now, that leaves open the broader question Senator Feinstein addressed. Does a country need this? Is it a practical thing that we can do, given the fact that we have a changing administration all the time? And there were very widely ranging different views on that. So it's not the case that everybody on our task force believes the country must do exactly this, but we all agree that if you don't do something like this, there's no possibility of nuclear power. Then there's a set of people who say, well, what is the consequence of not having that baseload generation? Can it all be done with clean power or renewable sources? Differences of view on that too, and depends very heavily, as this committee knows, on how the grid develops. But let me say it again, we give you a program to consider, which is in scale and time of dollars, in the scale of both time and dollars, one way of getting possibly a substantially 30% or so cheaper, not zero cost, nuclear power of the future. And we raise a warning that if you don't do something like this, the country does not have a nuclear option in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Deutch, and thanks to you and your committee for your leadership. We'll have around 5-minute questions now, and I'll begin. Just to reiterate, today we have, 99 reactors, or about that. They produce about 20% of all of our electricity, about 60% of our carbon-free electricity. I know in the region where I come from, the Tennessee Valley Authority expects to have about 40% of its electricity from nuclear power within a few years. And when combined that with its pollution control equipment on coal and new gas plants, it's going to be a very clean, lower cost mix of power. You're saying, though, that your committee unanimously agrees that if we don't take some action like the one the committee recommended, that by 2030, as a country, we won't have the option of having electricity produced by nuclear power? Is that what you're saying?
Precisely. Let me say to you that when I joined the Department of Energy, 6 or 7 nuclear plants were being fielded every year. We had 4 U.S. manufacturers of reactors, Babcock and Wilcox, Combustion Engineering, GE, and Westinghouse, 4 competing U.S. firms. That kind of capability is not going to be there in 2030 for sure. No new plants will be built in the United States unless they have a very favorable regulatory findings about managing the market impact, the market problems that I mentioned to you.
So we would lose 20% of our, what we call our baseload capacity, or of our electricity, which is baseload capacity in this case, and about 60% of our carbon-free. What is likely to replace that if that were not there?
Natural gas. Natural gas. But, sir, let me point out to you, you, I think, said that how many, there are 50 or so plants which are going to reach 80 years of age?
By 2038.
And I personally do not think it likely that the companies that manage those plants or the NRC are likely to relicense these plants from 60 to 80 years. They're the oldest plants we have. They would require quite a lot of additional investment, and without any attention to whether, not whether their cost of construction is cheaper, but if they actually don't have their electricity dispatched for one reason or another, they're not going to be there.
Now, to reiterate again, you gave us a recommendation and said unless you do something like the 25-year, $11.6 billion program to create advanced reactors, we won't have the option. That if we did something like that, we were more likely to have the nuclear option.
Let me pull it back one step further. Furthermore, in the first 5 years, we're proposing part 1 is an R&D phase. Meanwhile, you have these advanced light water reactors coming on. They may fit the bill, but they're going to need some help, and there's no certainty that that will be there. But there may be somebody who comes forward with a light water reactor proposal that's as good as the advanced reactor stuff. We're not married to any particular technology. We want to see the best technology development and pushed.
And you said that one of the difficulties, you mentioned 5 different difficulties in the report, but one of the difficulties is that nuclear power doesn't get credit for being carbon-free at a time when many people think carbon-free electricity is important. And if I heard you right, you said that in order to get credit that would be equal to the credit given to wind power, for example, it would be 2.7 cents per kilowatt hour.
Roughly. The investment tax credit.
Yeah.
Which wind and solar now. And of course, as you know, as the penetration of wind and solar increases, there's an intermittency cost which has to be carried by somebody on the grid, one way or the other. Yeah. That's not included in these numbers.
So at the moment, taxpayers give wind, for example, a 2.7 cents advantage over nuclear power. Both of them are equally carbon-free.
Yes, and I hope that I wouldn't be misunderstood to say I think we should take that away from wind.
No, I didn't mean that. I might do that, but I understand you wouldn't.
Correct. But my point, I want to underscore this. Carbon-free electricity generation is important in the United States and the world, and nuclear is an essential piece of that here and elsewhere in the world.
Senator Feinstein.
You know, John, I've known you for a long time. It's interesting to me because I look at this so differently. I look at it from the California perspective. I've been to Southern California Edison 3 times, seen their reactors. They have a problem with a steam generator. They buy 2 from a Japanese company. They're faulty. They end up having to shut down the plant. They've got 3,300 rods in spent fuel pools. No place to put them. They have a big security force. They've got a plant on a shelf above the Pacific with 6 million people living around. Then I get a call from Tony Early of PG&E that they're going to shut down both of their reactors because they believe they can now find cost-effective clean energy to replace their 1,100 megawatts. So I have all this spent fuel sitting in metropolitan areas in an earthquake-prone state when the rim of fire is going around the Pacific with big quakes. Latest,
New Zealand.
Yes, 7.8. I don't understand the push for this and the absence of a push to safely secure the waste. And we have tried, and he has enormous patience with me. And so we have tried year after year to get a pilot waste. We know there are people that want to build it, a waste facility, where some of this waste, because even if Yucca went ahead, Yucca would be filled. And we have 77,000 metric tons of hot waste all over the country. To me, until you've got a methodology to properly harbor this waste for the millennium, it's ridiculous to talk about any of this because something is going to happen. One day, and it's probably on the Pacific coast, some kind of Fukushima is going to happen. And all the probabilities of a big quake are up. So I sit here and I listen to this, and it's like I'm in a fairy tale that what I see in my state with 4 of the biggest reactors shut down, waste piling up, it makes no sense to me. And I don't understand why the industry doesn't help us push for waste facilities, and they don't.
First of all, again, I want to remind you, these are very sensible questions to raise about that's our task was to describe it. You may say, just the waste alone. But I want to make some remarks about that. This Congress commissioned a group of people under the chairmanship of Brent and Lee Hamilton. In 2012, they came out with a report, which was a systematic approach to managing the waste. You know, Senator, I got to say, I'm old enough to remember Lyons, Kansas, and trying to put the wastes away. And I'll tell you, that proposal from Congressman Hamilton and General Scowcroft is an absolutely sound way to, in an orderly fashion, address all of the concerns that you properly are raising.
We had Hamilton in. We sat there with the chairs of the authorizing committee. We put together a nuclear waste policy for this country, which was voluntary. We went through 3 chairs of the Energy Committee working on this. from New Mexico, Bingaman, Wyden, Murkowski. Murkowski worked with us all along. We've got a bill in there that the two appropriators, the two authorizers all support, and it sits in committee, and the nuclear waste industry does nothing to help pass it. Why? I mean, I don't understand this. And we see the accidents take place. It's a kind of madness to build stuff and not be able to properly dispose of the waste.
Pass the bill. The other thing I want to say, now California, I want to turn to California for a minute. If I may say a word about California?
Sure.
Which I know a little about, except that I have now 2 grandsons living in Palo Alto. So I have a much bigger interest in their safety.
Right.
I don't know how California is going to manage without those plants. But I don't think it's so clear that it's going to be cost-free. I mean, cost now in a risk sense. So I would say, I don't know the head of PG&E, but I know a lot of people in California who know a lot about energy. I don't think it's going to be so easy to get that energy.
All I can say is so far so good.
So far so good is good, and we have to keep at it, but I think it's not at all clear how it's going to come out.
Well, I guess I plead with the industry to help us get a permanent waste facility, and one won't do it, and there have to be a number of them. You know, the whip accident, which is now costing in the billions of dollars. It's expensive stuff. We deal with the waste, with the plutonium and uranium processing, and it's the same kind of thing. It comes in the hundreds of millions, and it grows to the billions of dollars to build these facilities. So somebody like me that sees what's happening in California says, why are we thinking about this if we can't provide the infrastructure to do it right?
We have to be players, because there's going to be much bigger problems with these issues in India and China. And the people who are going to be building these plants are going to be Russian firms, Japanese firms, Chinese firms. We have to be players in that.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Well, Senator Feinstein and I are going to figure out how to pass that bill.